Welcome back. It occurred to me that I haven't done one of my killer B-sides videos in a while, so going to remedy that today. I've got some great ones for you, 2 from the 70s and 1 from the 80s. And as usual, I think a lot of you may be shocked that these were actually B-sides because they're all classics and all big hits that are still heard regularly today. Remember, subscribe if you haven't already, like the video, all of that stuff. Financial contributions can be made a number of ways. Look in the description of the video. And one final note before we get started. For the first artist I'm going to feature, I tried to use the original recording, but it was one of those deals where the publisher or the artist's estate or God knows who has decided to block the music worldwide. So this video would not have been able to exist if I used the original recording. So you get me performing the song instead. Hope you don't mind. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone. It's not warm when she's away. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and she's always gone too long. Anytime she goes away. Wow, that song really is a vibe, isn't it? I love the starkness of that intro. Just Bill Withers' incredible soulful vocal, the very soft accompaniment from an acoustic guitar, and minimal percussion. It sounds like someone just lightly smacking the soundboard of the acoustic guitar, although I'm not sure. Ain't No Sunshine was first released in 1971 on the lead single from Withers' debut album, Just As I Am. But incredibly, it was the B-side of a tune called Harlem.
Summer night in Harlem. It's really hot. Well, it's too hot to sleep. I'm too poor to eat. I don't care if I die or not.
Very cool little bluesy number there, although in retrospect, it's hard to imagine that they couldn't recognize Ain't No Sunshine as being even a more special tune. By the way, Ain't No Sunshine could very well have been credited to Bill Withers and Booker T and the MGs. You've got Booker T. Jones as producer, Duck Dunn on bass, and Al Jackson Jr. on drums. And then a little bit more randomly, you've got Stephen Stills of Crosby, Stills and Nash fame on the guitar. I'm not sure how that came about, but it's very cool. And incidentally, I could hear Stephen Stills doing a great job on this one. I think it would have fit his voice very well. Very soon after the single's release, it became apparent that both DJs and listeners preferred the B-side, and Ain't No Sunshine quickly became the A-side. This was one of those great crossover hits. It reached number 6 on Billboard's R&B chart, and amazingly got even higher on the regular chart, the Hot 100. It made number 3. Musically, this thing is a study in simplicity and understatement, especially Stephen Stills' guitar part. We're in the key of A minor. The chords during the verse are A minor 7, E minor 7, and G7. Back to A minor 7. I really like what he does with the chords here. Those of you who know some music theory might know that there are 3 different kinds of 7th chords. We have 7th, major 7th, and minor 7. They all have a root 3rd, 5th, and 7th, but the difference lies in the 3rds and the 7ths, whether the 3rd is flatted or not, and whether the 7th is flatted or not. So the 3 and the 7 are really the defining notes in these chords. They're sometimes referred to as the guide tones. So when he plays these chords, he eliminates the 5th. That's just really a filler note, and just plays the root, the third and the seventh. For example, in the A minor 7, you got the root on the bottom, skip string 5, flat 7 on the D string, and flatted third on the G string. And he does a similar format on all of these chords. Real cool. There's just one additional chord in what I guess we'd call the chorus. We get a D minor 7. Ain't no sunshine when she's gone, and this house just ain't no home anytime she goes away. And a cool piece of trivia, remember that great bridge with the extended I know refrain? And I know. Apparently, when Withers and the band were still working the song out, he reached that point and said, yeah, I'm going to come up with some more lyrics for this. And brilliantly, the other musicians said, no, don't change it. It's great the way it is. What an excellent call. I mean, that's one of the biggest hooks in this song. It makes it unique. And Withers really sells it with the subtle variations he employs, the fact that he changes the melody as it goes along, that subtle bit of vocal fry he puts on at the end. It's just perfect. The lyrics are very straightforward. They express that age-old quandary of being stuck in a love affair that is probably not healthy for anyone involved, but is just so hard to shake. This is best evidenced in that line where Withers breaks out of the I know part we just heard. Hey, I ought to leave the young thing alone, but ain't no sunshine when she's gone.
Oh, black water, keep on rolling. Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me? Oh, black water, keep on rolling. Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me? Oh, black water, keep on rolling. Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me? Yeah, keep on shining your light.
Released in 1974 on the Doobie Brothers' What Were Once Vices Are Now Habits album, the genesis of Black Water came at least a year earlier when the band was working on their previous album, 1973's The Captain and Me. In between takes, Doobie Patrick Simmons was noodling around on the acoustic guitar, and producer Ted Templeman, probably best known for his work with Van Halen later on, said, "What is that? I love it. You should write a song around that riff." I'm assuming what Templeman heard that day was something like this. Which is more or less the main riff of the song. By the way, this is one of the best sounding acoustic guitars ever put to tape, if you ask me. It sounds so thick and rich and full. It's in double drop D tuning, which certainly helps. String 1 and string 6 are both tuned down a whole step to D. So what we get there is an A minor 7 chord, but with that open D string on top, it becomes A minor 11th. Beautiful chord. And then just a big fat D5. Funny enough, as much as Templeman loved the song, he said he never saw it as a single, just a very cool album track. And as a result, it was released on the B side of the album's first single, the A side being Another Park, Another Sunday.
Another lonely park, another Sunday. Why is it like they got that way? Just when you think you got a good thing.
According to Doobie Tom Johnston, who wrote the song, it was doing well on the charts until radio stations decided they didn't like the line, and the radio just seems to bring me down. I don't know, that sounds a bit sketch to me. You'd think if they had a problem with that line, it would have been an issue right from the start, but who knows, maybe. At any rate, that was followed by another single called Eyes of Silver, which more or less went nowhere. And then something really interesting happened. A radio station called WROV in Roanoke, Virginia, began playing Black Water, which again had been the B-side of the album's first single. And the listener response was off the hook. There's a river nearby called the Black Water. So I'm sure that local response had something to do with the local tie-in, but probably even more to do with the fact that this is just an incredible song. And due to that local success, it was decided to re-release Black Water, this time as the A side of a single, and it went on to become the Doobie Brothers' first number one. Now, this was back in the day when not all media was owned by one or two massive conglomerates. There were local markets, and this happened regularly. Songs would achieve regional success and then get picked up nationwide. It's kind of sad that this really isn't a thing anymore. Getting back to the musical analysis, that opening progression of A minor 11 to D is A Dorian. But at one point, Simmons' vocal lands on an F, which is the flatted sixth. That's indicative of Aeolian minor rather than Dorian. But he slowly bends it up to pitch, bends it up a half step to F sharp, which is the sixth, and now it's squarely Dorian. It's a very bluesy little melody. For the chorus, they shift to G major, which makes sense. That's the parent key of A Dorian. So we get a G chord, B flat 6, that's a pretty chord. Mississippi moon, won't you keep on shining on me? Then we get a surprise switch to A major, followed by E minor. That implies A mixolydian for a time, until we return to A Dorian here. And I ain't got no worries. Another very important musical element is those killer viola lines played by a woman named Novi Navag. I probably butchered that pronunciation. She's credited simply as Novi. She primarily plays over the A minor 7 to D segment, and not surprisingly, she relies heavily on the A Dorian scale. Patrick Simmons has said that as a kid, he was somewhat intrigued by the South from reading books like Huckleberry Finn, and that when he finally visited New Orleans years later with the Doobie Brothers, it was everything that he had hoped for. And these lyrics are pretty much directly inspired by his visit there. Well, if it rains, I don't care, don't make no difference to me. Just take that streetcar that's going uptown. These lyrics were actually jotted down while Simmons was on the streetcar going to do some laundry, apparently. He says it was raining outside, but the sun was also shining brightly. And of course, we have to mention one of the song's biggest hooks, that great a cappella vocal section near the end. Melodically, it's pretty straightforward, using a few notes, but it's got a great rhythmic feel. It's based out of a D major pentatonic scale, although at one point they do add a flatted third to give it a bluesy edge.
I'd like to hear some funky Dixieland. Pretty mama, come and take me by the hand.
By the hand, take me by the hand. Pretty mama, come and dance with your daddy all night long.
I'd like to hear some funky Dixieland. Pretty mama, come and take me by the hand.
By the hand, take me by the hand.
I went back to Ohio, but my city was gone. There was no train station, there was no downtown.
Released in July of 1982, My City Was Gone was the B-side of the Pretenders' hit Back on the Chain Gang. both songs also contained on the Pretenders' Learning to Crawl album. Now, this single was the first release from the band following the tragic death of guitarist James Honeyman Scott, who had died of a drug overdose. That was a huge blow to this band, and though they would go on to have great successes, including this single and album, I don't think they were ever the same after. That said, what an amazing single this is. Really a double A side in the tradition of those great Beatles singles like Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields Forever. And in fact, it's similar in another way in that the subject matter is pretty much the same, although approached from a different angle. In Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields, Lennon and McCartney reminisced about their past growing up in Liverpool. Meanwhile, in this single, Pretenders songwriter and frontwoman Chrissie Hynde also looks at her past, but in a far less whimsical way than the Beatles. Back on the Chain Gang was written as a tribute to Honeyman Scott. I found a picture of you, well, it hijacked my world that night. To a place in the past we've been cast out of. Now we're back in the fight. In spite of the bleak subject matter, there is that air of defiance in these lyrics. No matter what we've lost, no matter how difficult it is to bear, the only option is to get back in the fight, back on the Chain Gang. In My City Was Gone, which, by the way, for the longest time I thought was called Ohio, I suspect I'm not alone in that. Hynde looks back at her childhood like the Beatles, but there is a much more profound sense of loss here. I went back to Ohio, but my city was gone. There was no train station. There was no downtown. South Howard had disappeared. All my favorite places. My city had been pulled down, reduced to parking spaces. And honestly, who among us has never experienced that unsettling feeling of going back to visit your old neighborhood where you grew up, your old school, and it's gone. It's never the same. It's that old famous saying, generally attributed to author Thomas Wolfe, you can never go home again. These lyrics also reflect Hynde's growing concerns with environmentalism, particularly in the last two verses. I went back to Ohio, but my pretty countryside had been paved down the middle by a government that had no pride. The farms of Ohio had been replaced by shopping malls. Those words have a real Joni Mitchell, Big Yellow Taxi vibe to them, don't they? Now, musically, the standout feature of this track has got to be the bass line. So simple, but so infectious. It's an example of what we call an ostinato in music. In other words, an obstinate line that repeats over and over throughout the course of a piece of music. The bass outlines three simple chords, B minor, A, and E, and the combination of the E root notes on the upbeats and its major third, G sharp, on the downbeats at the end is really catchy. By the way, that bass line was played by Tony Butler, and I would be remiss if I failed to mention that just days before the death of James Honeyman Scott, the Pretenders had been forced to dismiss their original bass player, Pete Farndon, due to his uncontrolled heroin addiction. He would end up ODing himself the following year. So at this point, other than Chrissie Hynde, the only original member was drummer Martin Chambers. Replacement guitarist Billy Bremner adds some nice, tasty little bluesy licks over top of that bass ostinato. Bremner was already a rock and roll veteran by this point, having played with people like Dave Edmunds and Nick Lowe. I think it's interesting that his licks generally use the E minor pentatonic scale, in spite of the fact that, as mentioned a moment ago, the bass line keeps hitting on the major third, of that E chord. It's a nice little contrast that works well. I think another major factor in this song's enduring presence in pop culture was its use for many years by conservative radio host Rush Limbaugh as the introduction to his show. He used the instrumental part in the beginning, essentially the bit we just heard before Hind's vocal. Now, before I get any further into this, and before anyone starts writing angry political rants in my comments, please know that this is the most unpolitical channel you could ever hope to find on YouTube. I am not taking sides here, not making political statements, just stating the facts about this song. Limbaugh began using the song in 1984. This was before his show was nationally syndicated. It was just a local program out of Sacramento, California. He said he liked the irony of a conservative using an anti-conservative song. I guess he viewed Hind's environmentalism as being anti-conservative. And he said he also loved the unmistakable, totally recognizable bass line. Limbaugh had not licensed or received any permission to use the song, which resulted in a cease and desist order from the Pretenders label EMI. But when Hind found out about this, she said that both of her parents loved and regularly listened to Limbaugh, so she didn't really mind him using the song. A usage payment was then agreed upon, which Hind donated to PETA. It turns out she and Limbaugh had actually found some common ground in their opposition to a plan by the EPA to test some 3,000 chemicals on animals. Wow, not something you see a whole lot of these days. People on opposite ends of the political spectrum figuring out a way to get along. Anyway, that's it for now. Let me know if you guys still like this topic. I know there are plenty of other great B-sides I haven't covered yet. So if you guys like it, I will do some more. Thanks as always. Talk soon.